Star Wars figures. R2-D2. Chewbacca, Luke, and Princess Leia. They're the Star Wars Early Bird set of figures. These action figures are not yet available, but this Star Wars Early Bird certificate package is in stores with this colorful Star Wars picture display stand and certificate to send in to get a set of figures by mail. They'll be sent to you at home between February 1st and June 1st. The Star Wars Early Bird certificate package, new from Kenner.
Hi everyone and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. Today we have a toy collecting special. Joining me today is my son, Kyle Perrone. Say hi, Kyle.
Hello.
And my friend James, who's been in a couple of our previous shows. Say hi, James.
Hi, everybody. I missed the dim sum.
Yes, we could not do this show at the restaurant, unfortunately. And the main reason is because of all the different toys that we're going to be talking about. Now, this isn't just a general toy show we're doing. We are here looking at some of James's private collection of vintage Star Wars toys, action figure ships, mainly Hasbro, Kenner. My God, that's right. Back then it was Kenner, not Hasbro. And we're going to take a couple of quick peeks at some of his stash. Now, with us, like I said before, is Kyle. Kyle has probably not seen most of the stuff. He might have seen a few pieces here and there in other people's homes.
And pictures.
We've read a whole bunch of the Stephen Sansweet books that show you catalogs of all the toys that existed out there. They give you some background, but for the most part, not seen complete, some of them mint in box, some of them even unopened, which James has, Star Wars toys back from, we're talking about now, close to 30 to 35 years ago. It's ridiculous. So, James, tell us a little bit, first of all, about how the action figure and the general Star Wars collecting started, because from what we remember, from what I've read, because I wasn't even here when the Star Wars craziness started. I was here very briefly, and then I went back to Uruguay. And then when I came back, it was nuts. I remember I brought to Uruguay a handful of figures, and everybody was like, what the hell are these? Nobody has ever seen such great detailed figures. Now they're very dated now in terms of that they're all super articulated and cloth and vinyl and this and that. But back then, it was the top of the line. So, James, tell us how the rollout happened of all of a sudden stuff started popping out.
Well, this collection has almost become an albatross for me. My vault, which is not much of a vault, it's almost like the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end when there's boxes upon boxes and cases of stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's how my garage loft has turned into, and it's just overflowing, and it's actually gotten too much with other toys and Star Wars toys. But anyway, the Star Wars toys started. Really, it started back in 1976.
Even before the movie came out.
That's right. Lucasfilm wanted to make toys in conjunction with this movie. Now, they wanted to do something different, so they tied in with Kenner, and they wanted to make a different type of figure. At that point, the G.I. Joe size figure, which was about 12 inches in general, was the normal type figure. Right. And in addition to the G.I. Joe, which was Hasbro at the time.
Hasbro.
And the Mego collections were what a lot of people know from the late 60s, early 70s, which would be the size of the superhero figures and the Star Trek figures. Mm-hmm. And there were various movies. Almost every movie had a Mego type figure.
It's like a 7-8 inch kind of doll. And it wasn't so much action. It was more like a dollish.
They were very well made for their time.
Yeah.
A lot of accessories, sometimes good likenesses of the heads and the bodies.
Yep.
But it was a little too big. And what the creators of Star Wars wanted were figures that could actually interact with spaceships and play sets. Because of the way they envisioned the movie, they felt that this was a big necessity. And so a new scale of figure needed to be created.
Well, reason being, because if you stuck with the 12-inch, you couldn't have a ship in scale with a 12-inch figure. It would have been the size of a couch.
Yeah, the average size kid could never lift a ship. The best they might make is the land speeder, which fit for G.I. Joe size, because they did make ships or vehicles for G.I. Joe, but they were very expensive and they weren't as popular. It was mostly individual play.
So the formula was shrink the figure. Therefore, you could then have a decent size accessory, ship, vehicle, whatever.
So they picked one figure, say Luke Skywalker, and they said, okay, Luke Skywalker is almost 6 feet tall. He wasn't quite, but they almost 6 feet tall. And then they would go from there. And the larger figures, the larger characters like Chewbacca and Darth Vader would be around 4 inches.
Now, one quick story that I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if this is legend or truth or not, but I heard that the guy who ran Kenner at the time to decide on the 3 3/4 inch number. Why 3 3/4? Why not 3 and
A half.
a half or 3, or 4?
4.
The legend is that it was the size that he went like this with his finger. And he said, make it this size.
Yeah.
And somebody measured it and said 3 3/4.
I've heard that as well, and it makes sense. That's sometimes how genius
It's
is
a great
created.
story. If it's true, it's even
Yeah.
better.
and so the Jawas would be 2 or 3 inches, and the bigger figures would be 4 inches, and we went from there. And they were a size that could approximately fit in some play sets, in some spaceships, and kids could collect many of.
Plus the
because
price.
They had, and exactly. And the price point, they wanted to be $2 at the time.
Right, so you could charge a little
Not
less.
$1.99,
Right, it's a smaller figure than the previous slightly dollish looking things, so you could, in theory, sell more and hopefully make a couple bucks.
And they were relatively accurate. They were well painted. And in hindsight, some of them weren't as well made, and some characters, some like creatures.
But back then, it was beautiful.
I never really cared that Walrus Man wasn't his name, nor was that the outfit he was wearing in the movie. It was just cool to have another creature in my cantina. Before we go further on that, the figures were not going to be ready in time for the movie.
Right.
The movie was coming out in May of 1977, and they just did not have the ability to get everything going. This was a whole new line. Everything was new, and they weren't even sure if this movie was going to be successful.
As opposed to now, where a movie comes out in May, so in 3 months early, you'll see the figures on the rack, like they did this summer with Thor and Captain America, and all these figures showed up
by February.
months before and then all of a sudden the movie comes out, and if the movie bombs, you're stuck with all these figures on the pegs.
And it's a lot of money that stores invest now.
Back then, that did not happen. And even for this movie, it was groundbreaking that they wanted to market it and merchandise it this much. And that's why Fox at the time gave in on Lucas's request or demand that, you know what, fine, I won't take that much money, but give me the rights to the toys and the merchandising. And
It turned out to be a genius move.
on hindsight, it was a great move. But back then, they were still kind of trying to negotiate him out of it, but they let him have. They're like, you know what, shut him up, give him the damn toys, get him the hell out of here. And he did it.
So the movie comes out in May of 1977. It turns out to be bigger than anybody can possibly imagine. So definitely they're going full force with the toys. But the toys are still not going to be ready. Not even for the Christmas holiday in December of 1977.
So that's like 6 months of no toys. Now, keep in mind, the movie is still in the theater. It's not like these days where a movie stays in the theaters for maybe a month or two if it's a blockbuster.
Yeah, there's no home video. There's one place to see it in the movie theater.
No. So it's not unusual back then for a movie to be in the movie theater for 6 months, even a year, if it was a huge blockbuster.
Yeah, guys your age, Kyle, couldn't have lived back then now because you're ready for, you see the movie, you want the DVD 3 months later. So, around the end of the summer, early fall, 1977, a genius plan is hatched. It's called the Early Bird Set. What they're going to do is you go to the toy store and you buy a cardboard box. You buy an envelope with a certificate that you mail in for your 4 figures that they'll send to you someday. And you pay $10 for this. And in addition, you get a cardboard stand. You get a certificate signed by Luke Skywalker saying you're a member of the Star Wars fan club, and a couple stickers. And basically, you have the faith that this company is going to eventually sell. And you know what? It was unbelievable marketing. Every kid wanted this, but very few got it because they didn't know it existed.
Now, is this the Sears special, or this was a
this is way before that.
countrywide special?
This is nationwide.
Nationwide,
You would
okay.
go to a Toys R Us. In my case, I went to a smaller store called Tiny Tots in New Jersey, and basically, you bought a cardboard envelope. And I just happened to have the cardboard envelope in my possession for Kyle to see.
That's a huge cardboard envelope.
What was exactly inside the envelope? The promise and all that stuff you talked about before?
Yeah, basically what's inside it is a stand, a certificate, a sticker pack, a little letter from Luke Skywalker, as I mentioned, and the hope that you're going to get 4 figures in the near future.
This isn't as flimsy as I thought it was.
It was usually at the register. Now when you see things at the register like Hot Wheel cars or gum or something like that, it was only the cardboard, though.
Now, what happens after you receive this thing? What are you supposed to do? Wait till when?
You'd go to the store. There'd be another cardboard box that holds these cardboard envelopes. You purchase it, and then you mail in the certificate with your address and your name, and they mail it to you eventually. Now, I recall probably I was one of the first people to get it because I remember nobody knew what they were, and I'll tell you how I knew that. probably around December, maybe by Christmas, but I think it was closer to like January, I got a box. It's a little white box. Inside the white box is a plastic little vacuum-formed tray.
Oh, so these aren't packaged, carded.
These are not packaged in figure form yet.
Okay.
And you open it up, and they're in Kenner bags. And people who collect these figures know what Kenner bags are.
Okay.
They're sealed in these individual bags with their accessory.
So this is like when you used to order the free proof of purchase stuff.
Yes.
Your little box would arrive.
This was like the second coming. There was Luke, Leia, Chewie, and R2. And it was unbelievable having them. There were 4 figures.
Now, the picture shows you a lot more.
Well, the picture shows you what they're planning to make, and their drawings of what they're planning to make. They're not even the actual figures. They hadn't settled on the actual figure design at that point. So when I went to school with these figures, my principal had me stand up at the front of the cafeteria near the stage, and kids lined up to come see what Star Wars figures were, because nobody had Star Wars figures yet. That's how early it was in the collecting.
That must have been really cool. I wish they did that like in my time. They could just get me
the
to do
problem is
that.
now everything's out there. Everything comes out so fast. It's not a big deal anymore. That's the thing. It's different. Back then, this stuff, like I said before, it was unheard of. They didn't come out this fast, and the quality back then was incredible to go from the old style to this new style. It's just as crazy as now comparing the old figures with new figures. It's night and day. They're 100 times more articulated and weathered and colored, but back then you didn't have that. So it was incredible to see this.
I don't
these
know
new
what
things.
the modern equivalent would be in like a game changer, as they call it. I can't remember what's changed. I guess maybe the way they've added sound effects and light and cloth and things like that. Maybe that's the equivalent.
I think the closest thing to it would be the video games. The way that video games progressed from the old Ataris to the 90s to currently. It's one of those huge jumps in technology where, well, for action figures and toys, it's that big. It's like, oh, crap, this is different.
When Star Wars toys came out, Mego and G.I. Joe were done. Nobody cared anymore. This was the size everybody wanted to make. And from here on in, every company made 3 3/4 inch style figures. Not some of them not so good. Some
Right.
of them actually very cheesy, but that was the new norm.
Now, even though we have these smaller figures, Kenner still went along with a smaller line of larger figures that we'll talk about at a different point.
But anyway, at this point, you've got your 4 figures. And the rest of the figures are not available until spring of 78. And I got mine for Easter, so it was probably around March or April of 1978. And at that point, I received Han Solo, Darth Vader, the Stormtrooper, Ben Kenobi, and the Sand Person, and I had yet to find the Jawa. And the reason is the Jawa became very rare. And the reason for that is because they originally designed him with a plastic cape, very much like Ben Kenobi
The
and
famous
Darth Vader.
vinyl Cape Jawa. Hard to find.
And now it's very rare because they replaced him with a cloth cape, which is really a better figure.
It's more
and
accurate when you
realistic,
think about it.
But because they made a handful, it's a legitimate rarity. And
Be careful if anybody looks for those and tries to buy them on eBay, because a lot of people will take the Obi-Wan Kenobi cape and cut it small and put it on a Jawa and try to sell it off as that.
or modern cutting techniques allow for cheating. You'd be best to just buy an honest replica to have it in your collection because you're very rarely going to get an original.
Now, these figures you're just talking about now, are you talking about packaged now?
These are packaged in the legitimate
The
way of
Kenner
action figures.
card backs.
The way we see Kenner card backs.
And these are the 12, what they call the 12 card backs, right?
That's the holy grail, the 12-back cards.
The original
If you have them
12
in the 12-back. I mean, I imagine the rarest is an unopened early bird set of figures, but it's actually...
Yes.
The 12 backs are the holy grail of Star Wars
We're not
figures.
going to get into this because, first of all, we're not that much of an expert at it. And there are plenty of podcasts that I've listened to that go into this. But you're talking about stuff that is not only is it unopened, they grade these figures based on if there's any scuffs on the plastic bubble, if the hole is punched or unpunched, if the corner has a slight bent or no bent. You're talking about very, very exclusive, nitpicky way of judging the quality of these figures. But we can't go into that. That's just too nutty for us.
Yeah, my collection, as complete as it is not the top of the line. This is stuff that I did as a 7 or 8 year old kid. starting back in the 1970s. So, I've carried this stuff with me. There are people who have had this stuff almost in a vault. That no air, no nothing.
Right, smoke-free home, no discoloring. And it's funny because
they exist sometimes, but it's almost like, honestly, the ones that are really legitimate are probably a lot less than people are selling out there.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I've seen things where people tell you that, listen, the bubble doesn't have any discoloration. There's no yellow on the bubble. Forget the figure. The figure sometimes when they get old and they are exposed to air, they change, especially white, like stormtroopers. All of a sudden their legs start to turn a little yellow, but the body doesn't turn yellow. It's the chemicals they use to the plastic. But they're also grading the packaging, the bubbles and the scuffs and the colors and the this and the that. Does it have a price tag on it? Yeah. Was the price tag removed?
And some of mine have price tags. I didn't. Yeah. The way I bought it is the way I put it in the box. And while my collection is complete, I have one of everything that was made for the 3 3/4 inch line. I'm sure, there are people, somebody like Steve Sansweet, who claims as an adult started his collection because Star Wars changed his life and he bought one of everything. I'd imagine he is probably like one of the people who would be the reference point you'd go to.
Yeah. Well, let's take a little break so we can inform our listeners of the upcoming New York Comic-Con on October 13th through the 16th at the Jacob Javits Center in New York City. The reason why we mention this is because not only is this a great convention to go to if you're into all the genre stuff we're into, but we are actually going to be there. For the first time ever, Geekfest Rants has a table at New York Comic Con. So if you're interested in meeting us, and we're going to have some raffles and some giveaways and some freebies. And just come and say hi to us. And hopefully we can answer some of your questions. And we will be interviewing people and hopefully putting together at least one show out of the event. But the main reason to go is for the con itself. New York Comic Con is possibly the biggest East Coast convention of all things comic book, sci-fi, horror related. Some of the special guests that will be attending this time include Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, Chris Evans, Captain America, Jason Momoa from Conan, legendary director Kevin Smith, comedian Judah Freelander, actress Rose McGowan, comedian Patton Oswalt, SNL's Fred Myers, Robot Chicken's Seth Green, Beavis and Butthead creator Mike Judge, Stephen Lang from Avatar and Terra Nova, Chris Hardwick from The Nerdist, SNL's Fred Armisen, comedian David Cross, Clone Wars voice actress Ashley Eckstein, Chewbacca himself, Peter Mayhew, and literally tons and tons of other guests. Not only do you get entertainment genre guests, but you also have lots of comic book artists, comic book writers. You have the usual gigantic dealer room where you can buy just about anything you could think of, from comic books to toys to t-shirts, you name it. If it's genre related, you'll find it there. And you also have all the presentations and the panels. You'll find the hottest TV shows promoting themselves there, all kinds of panels, previewing upcoming episodes of shows, behind the scenes, information you can find out from these events. And you can also get autographs, a whole section of the convention floor dedicated to getting autographs. But once again, for us, come visit us. We'll be there at the Podcast Arena, which is near the Artist Alley. We are table F4. Look for us under the Geekfest Rants banner. So if you have the time and the means, October 13th through the 16th at the Jacob Javits Center in New York City. Come see us at New York Comic Con. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, James, what's next on your collection?
Well, by the time that figures were starting to roll out and people were able to get them, it was tough to get toys. Originally, they came out with a land speeder, an X-Wing, and a TIE fighter. And they were pretty cool. I mean, you could put the figures in it. But before that, you didn't have anything to play with your figures. So I was using Legos to build land speeders and X-Wings and TIE fighters. And they were really crude, but it was something to do.
I used to put them in shoes.
Yeah. So they eventually got the figures out. And by the summer of 78, stuff really started coming out. Well, come fall of 78, the Big Daddy came out. And it was the Millennium Falcon and the Death Star.
Now, the Death Star is considered to be a playset.
Yeah. The Death Star space station playset was basically a 4-level play environment that encompassed an elevator, a garbage compactor.
It's like a little building.
A control area, a bridge that you can open and close, and a cannon, which represented the cannon
from the trench, kind of.
From the trench run, they showed quick cutaways of of guns being fired. They weren't really in the movie a long time, but it was something that they could focus on and they give kids something to play with.
Now, these figures could interact, obviously, on these different levels, and you could recreate each scene.
Yeah, this thing was about, I'm guessing at the most, 2.5 feet tall. And it basically, each floor was scaled to the 3 3/4 inch figures, and you could ride them up and down the elevator and stuff like that. Compared to today's standards, it was pretty basic, but it was unbelievable if you had it, and you could not find this.
It's funny, one thing I mentioned to you a few minutes ago is that I noticed the price on it said $19.99. I'm amazed that for this, which is one of the biggest items in terms of size, I mean, I don't remember how much the Falcon was, but $19.99, even in the 1970s, is not a gigantically obscene price.
Well, actually, it is.
Well, if you're dealing with a $2 to $3 figure, I guess you have to make the calculation. $2 to $3.
That's 10 figures.
It's 10 figures worth, and now figures are about $10 a piece. So you figure that's like $100 item. Okay, that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of about a $80 to $100 item today.
So this was not easy to find, and I had a store called Bradley's, which doesn't exist anymore. And if people who are our age know that,
I know the name, but I've never seen one.
well, they put out a little flyer for Thanksgiving, a lot like Black Friday,
Yeah.
which now is crazy. They put out a little flyer that said they would get 8 of them. And if you were lucky enough to be 1 through 8 in line, you would get a Death Star. Well, I was number 1 in line. And I waited there probably from 7 in the morning for when the store opened at 8 or 9.
Ugh.
Now people are getting up at 5 in the morning. It's a whole different...
Now it's kind of like when the new Wii comes out, or when a new console or this or that, or an iPod or something.
Well, there was a line of people, I would assume also there for Death Stars. I didn't take a poll. I was a little kid. But the man came to the door opened, and he said, "Nobody run." And I ran as fast as I can, and I got to the back of the store, which is where the figures were in the toy section. And there were 8 of them sitting on the shelf. And here's number 1 for that store.
Wow. Now, what's funny is that when you look at the Death Star, if you go on eBay and start looking for it, very hard to find. But what you do find is pieces of them.
Yeah.
A lot of people sell individual parts. It's like a used car market. The cars are worth more in pieces than as a whole. And same thing with these. They're selling you the gun, a door, this or that. From what I understand, the foam that goes inside the garbage chute section, it all crumbled up, I guess, with age, and it melts away, so it's very hard to find.
Mine's in plastic. This is complete. The box isn't, brand new. It has been opened. I built it because I was a kid. So in that respect, it's not mint in the box. But I have the box. The box is in pretty decent shape, and the toy is complete.
Let me ask you something. Does this have any electronic parts?
No. If you spun the gun, it went click, 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 as if it was doing something, but it really didn't do anything. Everything was manual. The elevator lifted manual with a little lever on the side.
And it has the Dianoga.
Yes. To some people, that's a figure. And
the alien trash monster. It didn't have a name
didn't
back
have
then.
a name. A lot of things back then were yet to have, official names. And, with the internet, that's when real names were added to people.
I really like this thing. This is like better than some of the stuff I see now. Because now they're starting to run out of ideas, so they're making up their own little ships and stuff. This is a lot better than all those other little made-up ships.
Did you have to place all the stickers on it, or it came with
a
the
number of
them?
stickers on the control panels? I had to add. Some of those panels on the walls of the bridge and the control room are basically just a piece of cardboard that's slid in to a track. Mm-hmm. And the stickers on the control panels and the elevator had to be added, which I have. So again, it's not mint, but I bet you somebody would be happy to have this. But what you have to deal with in your generation, Kyle, is they call it the big toy of the year. So it kind of started when they decided to redesign the Millennium Falcon. Then they did the AT-AT. I think there's some other ships for the prequels that they're working on. And while it's exciting, when you're dealing with one a year, it's not as exciting.
Yeah.
It's basically aimed at collectors.
It's a lot more rare now to do this, because I believe what's happened over the years is they realized through marketing, I guess, is that kids don't buy play sets. Kids want ships. Kids want to have an action figure you can put in a ship and make it fly around. You can't fly around a play set. So this, in theory, is the last large-size play set, more or less. In other words, later with Return of the Jedi, yes, we have the Ewok.
They tried to make some things.
And then they ended up having to repackage them as something else, because, it doesn't sell as much. But nowadays, what they do is they try to combine a play set and a ship. So they'll take, for example, currently a ship from Clone Wars, and it's a play set too. It opens up to a play set.
It's also like a rebel.
A base,
a clone base, or
right?
something.
So they can't go all the way to playset mode. Yeah, they can't go all the way to playset mode anymore. They're afraid because they won't sell. But it's interesting that at some point, at least they tried it, and you have it.
But ironically, the times we live in now are very similar. Times are considered tough, and people aren't buying as many big toys.
Late 70s was a tough time.
It's almost a copy. If I were a parent now, I would buy my kid as many figures as I could buy, which is kind of what my parents made sure I got. And, some relatives who would buy me things for Christmas, and then my parents knew how much this meant to me, so I would buy more. But it was a lot tougher to get everything because a lot of people didn't have a ton of money. And right now it's the same things between video games and movies and figures. The companies realize the collectors buy a few, but the real kid, the real market who they're aiming at, don't buy as many play sets.
Now, what do you think this goes for today? If you were to buy your particular one, obviously it's not mint in box, but even the fact that all the pieces are there.
I imagine at the most $100 or $200 because it's been opened, it's been built,
but it's there.
But everything is complete, and the box is pretty solid. I've seen them complete, but not even in a box, just in a generic brown box, for about $60 to $70.
And I've seen individual pieces go for like $10, $15. So you figure.
So you figure with this complete, like you said, most people have parts that they found at garage sales, things like that. So maybe they wouldn't even want it, but there'd be a handful of people that would probably pay about $100 or $200.
I've seen this thing on in this magazine that me and my dad get, which they have these old toys and stuff. I've seen figures go for $1,000.
Oh yeah, well that's when we talk about those super graded.
There's some rare stuff.
So I expected this maybe to go for maybe at least $500.
You might be right.
If it's brand new, if it's
brand new, then this is gonna be
it's a few $100.
Kyle's right. I'm probably lowballing it because I just don't know. And the stuff I've looked at, maybe the last time I looked at prices was the late 90s because I'm not in it for the money. This is my collection, and now I'm stuck with it.
All right, what do you got next?
Well, the next thing that I have is very rare. Very few people were able to find this. In fact, if you found it at all, in modern times, it's probably not even working. Well, it's the radio-controlled Jawa Sandcrawler.
Now, one quick question. Was it ever released without radio control?
No.
This is the only version of an actual Sandcrawler from back then?
Yeah. Let me just say, radio control from the 70s is forward and backward, and maybe it turns. Before the Sandcrawler came out, they came out with a land speeder that they called Sonic Control, which I also have, and that basically responded to clicks. You had a R2-D2 remote control that you clicked it, and it goes click, you snap it. It would almost be like snapping a mousetrap, and it would go forward, or it would turn left. It really didn't do very much, and but it was cool to have because it moved on its own. It would basically go in some direction on its own, so that was great. Compared to the regular Sandcrawler, this thing was like the Cadillac. Unfortunately, that wasn't very sophisticated. Well, they came out with some radio-controlled toys in the late 70s, not just Star Wars, but Kenner in particular. They would have a controller with a little metal antenna on it, and it would usually go forward or backward and maybe turn. And they also made an R2-D2. The R2-D2 was approximately...
The size of a G.I. Joe figure?
A foot tall, exactly. Like the size of a G.I. Joe figure or a large-size figure. It wasn't meant to play with other figures, per se. It was just so you can say, I have an R2-D2. And if you went on anything other than a regular tiled or wooden floor, it would get stuck. It would fall over. It wouldn't move. It just... It would make a noise. And this Jawa radio-controlled Sandcrawler is the same thing. Same controller, same principle, except it is so cool for the time because it holds the figures, the door opens, and you can suck up an R2-D2 just like he got pulled up in the movie. It has a little hatch. Now, it's not in a great scale compared to the Sandcrawler.
Right. If you wanted something in scale, you need something the size of a refrigerator.
Or like Legos.
Well, no, yeah, it would have to be gigantic because even with the smaller action figure size, you're never going to get the proper scale. Now, this particular one, it looks as if you were to size them up, it's the size of about maybe 3 figures standing, one on top of each other. And inside, you can pop it up. You can pop the top.
Well, there's control panels for the R2 units and the Jawas to use. Like James said, there's the sucker thing to suck up R2-D2, and of course you can remote control it.
Obviously, with the remote, you can make it move around, but you have to kind of get used to the fact that the scale, it's impossible for something this gigantic, to be accurate. But actually, a remote control vehicle for its time, it's like, wow, that's interesting. It's something that, for example, they couldn't do at the time with the Death Star. They couldn't add electronics to it. And here's the trick. This is exactly the trick. The trick is, okay, this is both a play set and a vehicle. This is the way to go because you hit them with both things. The people that want play sets, they get that, and it's also a vehicle, so you can actually, move it around and the kids like it.
Now, mine's in a dual language package. It's also got French language because it was pretty tough to find this on regular shelves. It was kind of made in limited amounts, and sometimes you get it in Canada, sometimes you can get it in Europe, but that's the situation with this one. But I think it's one of the coolest toys they made of the Star Wars era.
Cool. I would like to thank all of our participants today, Kyle Perrone and James, for letting us come and take a peek at his collection. And hopefully we can do this again because there's tons of these toys that have never even seen the light of day. They're sitting in a secret, undisclosed location, and hopefully we can do a couple of sets like we did today, and everybody can have a quick, listen to us describe them and talk about them because they're very special to collectors. And even somebody like Kyle, who has never even looked at a lot of this stuff, he could see, and you guys could kind of take a look and see the progression of how these toys started out and what they are now in terms of you see them at the store and you're like, oh, look, this is something new. It's not new. It's been done once, twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times.
Now, the original packaging is even back now as a purchasing gimmick.
It is trendy now for marketing purposes to repackage things with the old pictures, and they take new pictures of it, but they pose them and they do the art design like the old ones. So when you see these things in the stores, you could kind of tell, if you do a little research, you'll find out that it's all been done before, and now you have a chance to see where it all started. So on behalf of all of our participants today, we'd like to thank you for joining us on Geekfest Rants.
If this is a consular ship, where is the ambassador? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Stop.